Welcome back. What once seemed like part of a futuristic world has now become a present day reality. Facial recognition is the latest technique several shops and law enforcement are using to prevent crime. However, this act is causing concerns among some people, sparking a debate and leaving many questioning whether or not it's infringing on our civil liberties. Kaitlin Jackson Roll, a supervising attorney for the criminal defense practice at Bronx Defender, now joined me to discuss. Kaitlin, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I want to jump right into it. I thought this was really interesting because this was something new to me. Now, according to NBC New York, businesses have begun using biometric identifier information, also known as BII, for facial recognition. For those who aren't familiar, can you just explain what that is?
Absolutely. So biometrics are anything that can be used to identify you based on a physical characteristic. So, for example, fingerprints are biometric, eye scans, facial recognition, voice recognition. So biometric identifier information would be something that a surveillance system is using to track individual people based on some type of physical or auditory characteristic.
Oh wow, that's really interesting. I didn't know that it included fingerprints. So that means that some of us, or a lot of us actually, if you have a smartphone, are pretty familiar with this type of technology. So thank you so much for, I guess, clarifying that. I didn't know. Now, as I mentioned, we're talking about how law enforcement is kind of getting into this kind of field. Can you just tell me what your thoughts on, the laws and the law just keeping up with the access to all this new technology?
Yeah, I think it is absolutely true that technology has moved much more quickly than the pace of the law to protect our privacy. And that's true outside of just the context of facial recognition. For example, whenever you search for something you want to buy on your phone, we all have experienced that immediately ads start popping up for the same thing. That's because third parties are collecting and selling your data. You can imagine a world in which we have laws to prevent that, but that's not something that the government has done a good job of, and the same is true with facial recognition. There's just very little that limits third parties or law enforcement's use of this kind of potentially privacy invading technology.
Now, I know that anytime, like especially with the ads, people just don't respond well to it. Can you just give me your opinion on why you think that so many people just don't really like that feeling of, just always being watched or being monitored?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is sort of a basic idea that most of us have, that we have a fundamental right to be left alone by people and organizations and the government when we haven't chosen to interact with them. And so I think it can be really uncomfortable when truly, the product that you're not selling, but someone else is making money off of is your information, whether that's what your face looks like, what your iris scans are like, what your search history is. Because I think it's twofold, right? It both invades our privacy, but it's also a real commodity. There's a lot of money to be made from your information that you didn't sell. And I think both of those things can be uncomfortable for people.
Now, in regard to just facial recognition, are there any laws that require people to be notified when they are being recorded or facially recognized?
That's a really good question, and it depends significantly on where you're located in the country. I'm not aware of any laws that require notification of just simple recording. I think, as most of us are aware, surveillance cameras have been in use for a long time in businesses, and I don't know of any state that requires the public to be notified simply because someone has a surveillance camera. That said, there are some laws on the books that are in some places that require notification when biometric information is being collected. So, for example, in New York City, there is a law that requires businesses that are collecting biometric data to notify customers. Whether or not that actually alleviates the privacy concerns, I think, is really up for debate. You can imagine a world where every business starts collecting this information. And then at that point, even if you're notified, how do you opt out? Or, for example, say your pharmacy, say you go to CVS and that is where you get your medication, and CVS is collecting this information. Even if they put a notice on the door, you don't really have the option to opt out and not go there. So I think simple notification is a step, but whether it's a meaningful step is up for debate.
That's a really good point that you mentioned, because like as you said, if everywhere is doing it, it's like, well, you can't stop interacting with society, right? You still have to go out into the world. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. Now, I really want to get your opinion on this situation. So there was a case where a woman was denied entry to Radio City Music Hall because her law firm was involved in a lawsuit. Now, although the woman does not practice in New York and was not involved in the case, she was still denied access to the show because her face was recognized in their system. Can you just tell me your opinion on that? It sounds kind of scary to someone else probably reading this. So can you just tell me what your thoughts on that whole situation is, and whether or not facial recognition could be, I guess, something that's good or something that could be more on the negative side?
Sure. So with the caveat that I'm a criminal defense lawyer, my expertise is really in law enforcement use of this technology, and this is really about a third-party private business, but I'm happy to give my opinion for what it's worth. I think this is a really interesting question and goes to the heart of what we were talking about a little bit ago in terms of the law just not keeping up with the technology. So businesses tracking people and not letting them in has happened in a much smaller way for a long time. So I think probably everyone has had the experience of going into a gas station or somewhere and seeing a sign on the wall that has a picture that says, like, this person isn't to be let back in. Right? Or businesses might have a list of, like, these few people have shoplifted here, or a bar might have a list and say, these people have caused problems, don't let them back in. What's different about facial recognition, it's essentially doing the same work, but on such a massive scale that all of a sudden it makes us much more uncomfortable. And it's part of why the law hasn't caught up, because in many ways, the law sees this facial recognition situation as analogous with a business owner saying, these 5 people have caused problems, I won't let them in. But the truth is, what's happening and what happened at Radio City Music Hall is they're probably going through millions of people and are able to track people on an unprecedented scale. And again, our law just has not been able to keep up with that reality and see the real difference in that situation and a bar saying these 5 people consistently cause problems, don't let them in. Whether or not you think that that's a problem is really up for any individual to decide. But I think in any event, it's really something we have to contend with, and we have to be honest with ourselves about the difference here.
Now, in regards to just law enforcement, can New York City expect to see facial recognition being more widely used in regards to law and policing?
Sure. Actually, law enforcement's already widely using facial recognition technology in policing. You can imagine how appealing this technology is to police officers, because what it has the potential to do, albeit I would argue not nearly as accurately as law enforcement would like to believe, is to take cases that are otherwise unsolvable and provide the police with a suspect, right? This is the kind of technology that the police can use in cases where there is no DNA, there are no fingerprints, there are no witnesses, all we've got is surveillance. And it's really appealing to use a type of technology that says, hey, even if you've got none of that, I can help you figure out who committed this crime. I think what is really scary is that law enforcement are not scientists. They are the ones using this technology, but are not really trained to deeply understand it. And therefore are often left with the impression that it is much more accurate than it in fact is.
Well, Kaitlin, thank you so much for joining me. I definitely learned a lot today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
We have to take a quick break, but we'll be back with more Open right after this.